They walked into the rusty Anchor bar like two ordinary black twins looking for a quiet drink. No spotlight, no warning, no hint of the storm about to break. Just two men in the wrong place at the wrong hour in a town where prejudice sleeps light and wakes angry. Ravensridge, Colorado, a place where off-duty cops drink too hard, judge too fast, and believe the night belongs to them. And tonight, 3 corrupt cops were already circling their next targets. The air was thick. Country music thumped low, almost swallowed by the tension that crept between the dim lights and sticky floorboards. Conversations froze. Eyes shifted. Because everyone in that bar knew the rule. When Travis Boyd and his crew were drunk, someone was going to bleed dignity, and they believed their badges, holstered or not, made them gods in the dark. But not tonight. Not with these 2 men. Marcus Hale and his twin brother Darius sat there in complete silence. Calm, unbothered. The kind of calm that does not come from ignorance, but from experience so deep, so carved into the bone, that fear has nowhere left to live. Yet no one knew who they were. No one knew what they were capable of. Not the crowd. Not the bar staff. And definitely not the 3 officers swaggering toward them, already drunk with the kind of arrogance that blinds a man right before the fall. They saw black men. They saw outsiders. They saw victims. What they didn't see were the years of discipline behind those steady eyes. They didn't see the military captain who had commanded soldiers in deserts half a world away. They didn't see the SEAL commander who had led men through missions so classified they barely existed on paper. They didn't see judgment or restraint or the coiled patience of human weapons trained to end danger in seconds. They saw nothing. And because they saw nothing, everything was about to collapse. No one inside the rusty Anchor bar knew that the next 15 minutes would shatter careers, expose a network of corruption, and turn this quiet mountain town into a national spectacle. No one knew that arrogance was about to collide head-on with true power. The kind of power you cannot fake, cannot bully, cannot outrun. If you're here because you follow stories where justice doesn't whisper, it roars, then stay with this one. And if you want more dark cinematic tales where the underestimated fight back and the truth hits harder than any fist, make sure you subscribe. What happens next is the reason men like Boyd should have stayed sober. Because when you push the wrong people, the right consequences always find you. The rusty Anchor bar carried the kind of darkness that wasn't just about lowlights. It was a heaviness, a stale fog born from spilled whiskey, tired neon signs, and the kind of silence that falls when people know trouble is coming and choose not to interfere. Country music murmured from a dusty speaker in the corner, its twang fighting to stay alive under the weight of unspoken tension. The place smelled of old beer, fried grease, and the quiet fear of a town that had seen too much and done too little. Marcus and Darius Hale stepped inside without fanfare. No swagger, no attitude. Just 2 black men looking for a drink on a cold Ravensridge night. They moved with a natural fluidity, the kind you only notice when the room itself seems to shift around them. They took a table in the back, ordered 2 beers, and sat in that calm, steady way of men who have endured storms far darker than any bar fight. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, but predators notice calm. Predators mistake it for weakness. Travis Boyd saw them immediately. Even through the haze of cheap liquor, his eyes sharpened with that familiar ugly gleam, the kind that says, "I need someone to remind me I matter." Behind him stumbled Kyle Riggins, barely holding himself upright, and Miguel Reyes, the only one sober enough to regret following this pack. Together they fanned out like a hunting line, cutting through the stale air until they formed a half-circle around the Hale brothers' table. Boyd leaned in, crowding their space, the scent of whiskey rolling off him in waves. His voice came low and slow, the way a snake might test the air before it strikes. "You 2 sure you're in the right place?" It wasn't a question. It was a judgment, weighted with the same old venom the Hales had known since childhood. Marcus didn't look up. He took a quiet sip of beer, as if Boyd's presence barely registered. Darius finally raised his eyes, meeting Boyd's stare with a stillness so complete it unsettled him. There was no fear in that look, no apology, just the controlled patience of someone who had learned long ago that reacting too fast gives small men exactly what they want. Boyd pushed harder. "I said, you boys lost? Don't usually see your kind around here." The words weren't loud, but they hit the room like a dropped glass. Conversation stalled. A couple at the bar pretended to laugh louder than they needed to, as if noise could shield them from guilt. Miguel shifted uneasily but said nothing. Then it happened. The first silent exchange. Marcus finally set his bottle down. Darius exhaled once, barely a sound. Their eyes met for half a second, and the world seemed to snap into alignment. It was the kind of look forged in places where hesitation kills. A look packed with history, calculation, and something more dangerous than anger, understanding. Because they had been here before, maybe not in this bar, maybe not in Ravensridge, but at 15, walking home from school, 2 officers had stopped them on a sidewalk for nothing more than carrying backpacks. "Where'd you steal those from?" one had said. Both boys lowered their heads then, fists clenched but held back, swallowing humiliation because surviving meant obedience, not pride. That memory flickered now, brief, sharp, electric, but the men sitting here weren't those boys anymore. Marcus finally lifted his gaze to meet Boyd's, calm, steady, too steady. The kind of calm that should have warned every man in that bar to step back, the kind that says without a single word spoken, you have no idea who you're dealing with. But Boyd didn't see it. Predators rarely recognize the lions until they roar. Marcus didn't move, but everything inside him shifted into a different mode. The room that had felt dim and oppressive a moment ago now unfolded itself like a battlefield schematic. Every angle, every silhouette, every potential threat. Years of training rewired the world into lines, exits, and outcomes. He didn't need to speak for Darius to understand that the switch had flipped. Boyd stood too close, leaning forward with the sloppy confidence of a man who thought size and noise could substitute for skill. Marcus noted the details instantly. The officer's weight was pitched forward on his left leg, throwing his center of gravity off. His right side was wide open, elbow flared just enough to indicate he'd reach for a weapon with impulse, not intention. His breath was hot with whiskey, his pupils dilated, unfocused. This wasn't bravery, it was delusion. Darius read Miguel Reyes at the exact same time. He didn't even need to turn his head, he just listened. The shift of a boot scraping the floor, the shallow, controlled breathing. Miguel wasn't drunk, he wasn't eager. He was sweating in a way that had nothing to do with heat. Darius had met men like him in forward operating bases across the world, the ones caught between orders and conscience. Miguel's hand hovered closer to his holstered gun than policy allowed for off-duty officers. Not because he intended to draw it, but because he was terrified someone else would. He was the one wild card whose fear might turn into something unpredictable. Then there was Kyle Riggins, the youngest, the loudest, the most intoxicated, the kind of threat commanders fear more than trained killers because there is no logic to anchor him. His feet were unstable. His knees sagged. His fingers twitched with restless aggression. Drunk men don't calculate consequences. Drunk men choose chaos. To Darius, Kyle was the most dangerous person in that entire building, not because of ability, but because of complete lack of it. Above them, near the rack of old liquor bottles and the crooked neon sign, Marcus identified the first camera, a tiny black dome with a cloudy lens aimed toward the bar entrance. Second camera near the exit sign, third behind the counter, half obstructed by a line of dusty beer taps. None of them great quality, but all of them pointed in ways that could capture enough truth to matter later. He also found every exit without even looking directly at them, one by the front door, one in the kitchen, one behind the jukebox that led to the back lot. And most importantly, he registered the flow of people, customers inching away, some watching through lowered eyelids, some ready to excuse themselves and vanish if things went south. Civilians, all predictable. The only man in the place who recognized real danger was Eddie Marshall, the bar owner. He had the look of someone who had seen this act too many times, his jaw clenched, throat tight, eyes darting between the officers and the twins. And then, As subtly as a man can manage while still pretending to clean glasses, Eddie slipped his phone out from beneath the counter and angled it just enough to record. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't tell them to stop. He just started filming, the way people do when they want to do the right thing but have lived long enough to understand the cost. Marcus and Darius acknowledged all of this without turning their heads, without whispering a single word. It was the kind of situational awareness only drilled into men who had lived where shadows might hide bombs and laughter might mask hostility. To an untrained eye, nothing had changed. But to anyone who had ever worn a uniform, the energy was unmistakable. The Hale brothers had mapped the room, assessed every threat, calculated every outcome, and done it all in a handful of seconds. They looked relaxed. They looked calm. But instantly they were already 3 moves ahead of everyone else. And that was the moment when the audience, the crowd, and even the camera would begin to understand. These weren't just 2 guys in a bar. They were professionals. Predators had circled them, believing they had found prey. But the truth was already shifting. The battlefield had been chosen. The analysis was complete. And the only men in danger now were the ones too arrogant to recognize they were already outmatched. Boyd's voice cut through the bar like a shard of broken glass. Outside, now. It wasn't an invitation. It was a demand sharpened by ego and cheap alcohol, the kind of tone men like him used when they believed the night would bend to their will. Kyle snickered behind him, swaying on his feet, while Miguel shifted uneasily, instinct tugging at him like a warning he was too scared to voice. Marcus set his bottle down. No haste, no hesitation. Just a quiet, deliberate motion that made the table suddenly feel small and the air suddenly feel thin. Darius didn't move at first. He simply watched Boyd with that same steady, unnerving calm. The kind of calm that made lesser men furious because they couldn't crack it. Boyd slammed his palm on the table, rattling the glassware and jolting half the room. "You're done drinking. Out." His face was flushed, jaw tight with the thrill of someone who thought he'd already won. He didn't notice the way every conversation in the bar died at once. He didn't notice Eddie Marshall watching from behind the counter, phone still recording, heart pounding like a drum. What he did notice was that Marcus and Darius still weren't intimidated, and that infuriated him. Darius finally rose from his chair, but not in a rush, not even with irritation. He stood like a man stretching after a long meeting, posture effortless, movements controlled. He glanced at Marcus. A tiny nod passed between them. Coordination, timing, clarity. It was the kind of synchronicity that only comes from years of operating as one unit. Marcus stood at the same moment. 2 bodies, 1 motion, smooth, precise. Too precise. There were veterans in that bar who recognized it instantly, the shift in weight, the quiet readiness, the absence of fear. A few patrons turned their faces away, not because they didn't want to see, but because deep down they already sensed what was coming and didn't want to be caught in the fallout. Boyd stepped back, just half an inch, but enough for his boots to scrape the floor. He covered it by puffing his chest forward. "Move!" His spit hit the floor between them, a line drawn in ignorance, not authority. Darius tilted his head, not impressed, not amused, just done. "You should stop," he said quietly. Not dramatic, not shouted, just a calm statement that carried the weight of someone who had issued warnings before, someone used to being obeyed. Boyd laughed, a harsh clipped sound that echoed too loudly in the cramped bar. "Is that supposed to scare me?" Marcus didn't even blink. "No," he said. "It's supposed to help you." The room tightened around those words, every muscle, every heartbeat, every unspoken prayer. Kyle shoved through the crowd, pointing at the door with a sloppy, trembling hand. "Let's go. You want to talk big? Do it outside. That's our spot, our turf." Our turf. The phrase hung in the air like a bad omen. Darius stepped forward, forcing Kyle to stumble back without even being touched. Marcus followed, both brothers moving with the quiet confidence of men who had walked into far worse situations and come out the other side. Their shoulders aligned, their steps matched, their eyes stayed level. Nothing about them screamed danger, but everything about them whispered it. Boyd pushed open the bar door with a dramatic swing. Cold night air rushed in, sweeping dust and tension out across the floor. The neon sign flickered, as if even it hesitated. Miguel's breathing quickened. He looked at Eddie for half a second, silently pleading for this to stop. Eddie did nothing but keep recording, clutching his phone like a lifeline. Then, for the first time that night, Marcus spoke with intention. "You're walking yourself into something you're not prepared for." Boyd smirked. "We'll see." The door closed behind them with a heavy final thud. And just like that, every person left inside the Rusty Anchor felt the same thing. Whatever was about to happen in that parking lot would not be a simple fight. It would be a reckoning. The parking lot behind the Rusty Anchor bar looked like a place the night had forgotten. A single street lamp buzzed overhead, its weak light flickering like it was struggling to stay awake. Wind swept across the cracked asphalt, carrying the dry smell of pine from the mountains and the sour bite of whiskey leaking off Travis Boyd's breath. It was cold, quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath right before something breaks. Boyd shoved the door open and marched out first, shoulders squared, convinced the darkness outside belonged to him. Kyle stumbled after him, laughing too loudly, the sound sharp and ugly against the empty night. Miguel trailed behind, the only one who kept glancing over his shoulder, as if hoping someone, anyone, would tell him he didn't have to be part of this. Marcus and Darius stepped into the lot without resistance. Not slow, not fast, just steady. They didn't posture, didn't puff their chests, didn't rise to the bait. They simply walked forward with the quiet composure of men who had faced real danger before and learned that fear is a choice you don't have to make. But Kyle wanted fear. He needed it. "So what are you, huh?" he slurred, circling Darius with the wobbling swagger of a man too drunk to recognize a cliff when he's about to fall off one. "Think you're special? Think you can walk around our town acting like you belong?" He jabbed a finger into Darius's chest. "Boys like you never belong." He dragged out the word boys. Slow, poisoned, meant to humiliate. Darius didn't react, not even a flinch. He just looked down at Kyle's trembling finger, then back up at his eyes with the kind of patience that terrifies men who expect immediate submission. Kyle pushed again, harder this time. "Yeah, that's right, you hear me. You think we don't know your type? Always whining, always trying to start something, always looking for attention." Marcus took one half-step forward, but not aggressively, just enough to angle himself between his brother and the spiraling chaos. Kyle's face twisted with triumph, mistaking that shift for fear. Then Boyd made his move. "You think you're equals?" he growled, grabbing Marcus by the collar. "You think you can sit in my bar, in my town, like you're not beneath us?" Before Miguel could stop him, before Kyle could cheer, Boyd slammed Marcus's head down onto the cold metal hood of a parked truck. The sound echoed, a hollow, metallic crack that seemed to ripple across the lot and back again. Marcus exhaled slowly, eyelids pressing shut, not from pain, but from memory. The cold metal beneath his cheek wasn't a truck hood anymore. It was a dusty steel door in Fallujah, 2011. Heat wave rising. Bullets cracking past. Smoke so thick it tasted like burnt rope. He was 21, crouched behind a blown-out wall, listening to insurgents advance on a unit that had already taken heavy fire. 3 of his men were pinned down, and he had seconds, only seconds, to decide whether to hold position or break cover and run into a kill zone to pull them out. Back into Ravensridge, he opened his eyes. The street lamp flickered. The cold bit into his palms. Boyd shoved him harder, mistaking silence for defeat, mistaking restraint for surrender. "Look at you," Boyd spat, pushing Marcus's head back down. "Acting calm, acting innocent. But we know what you people are like." There it was, the oldest wound, the deepest cut, delivered with a smirk from a man who thought he held power simply because the night was dark enough for him to abuse it. Kyle started laughing again. "Thought you were tough inside, huh? Not so tough now, are you?" Marcus lifted his head slowly, too slowly, the kind of slow that should have warned Boyd he had crossed a line from which there was no return. Darius stood behind them, jaw set, breathing controlled, eyes tracking every angle, every mistake, every opening. Miguel whispered, "Travis, stop." But Boyd didn't hear him, or didn't care, because he had no idea that the man he was humiliating in a small-town parking lot had once walked through explosions and gunfire to drag wounded soldiers to safety. He had no idea that the man whose head he was shoving against cold steel had commanded teams under conditions that would make him crumble. He had no idea that the calm he mistook for weakness was actually discipline forged under fire. And that arrogance was about to cost him everything. Darius stepped forward, not with anger, but with the kind of composed certainty that makes reckless men hesitate without knowing why. The flickering street lamp carved sharp angles across his face, emphasizing the steel in his eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lunge. He simply looked at Boyd, then Kyle, then Miguel, as if studying a set of problems he had already solved 100 times before. "Do you have any idea," Darius said quietly, "how many laws you've broken in the last 10 minutes? Kyle barked out a laugh, too loud, too drunk to understand that the temperature of the night had just changed. "What are you, some kind of lawyer now?" he taunted, staggering closer. "You think saying big words is going to save you?" But Darius didn't even glance at him. He kept his eyes on Boyd. The predator suddenly felt like prey. "Unlawful harassment," Darius continued, each word clipped, precise, deliberate, assault, physical intimidation, detaining without probable cause, illegal search, abuse of authority. Oh, and let's not forget racial targeting. That one tends to stack. Miguel swallowed hard. Even Kyle's grin faltered. Boyd opened his mouth to interrupt, but Darius wasn't finished. "You put hands on my brother," he said, voice flattening into something even colder. "You slammed his head into a vehicle without justification. You've threatened us repeatedly." He stepped closer, not threateningly, just undeniably. "And now that we're outside, with you drunk, armed, and recording yourself escalate a situation you created, you've crossed the threshold into aggravated misconduct, maybe worse." Kyle shoved him. "You talk too much," he slurred. "All that fancy crap? You think this is a courtroom? This is our lot. Our call. Nobody cares what you say out here." Still, Darius didn't break eye contact. "You're right," he said softly. "This isn't a courtroom." Then he leaned in, lowering his voice, until even the wind had to lean closer to hear. "But everything you're doing will end up in one." Behind them, Eddie Marshall cracked open the back door of the rusty anchor and angled his phone to catch the entire exchange. His hands trembled, but his resolve didn't. He'd watched these officers push people around for years. Tonight, he wasn't going to pretend he didn't see. Boyd noticed the phone and his lips curled. "Put that down," he barked, pointing at Eddie. "This is police business." "You're off duty," Darius corrected. "Drunk, violent, and currently violating more statutes than you can pronounce." Kyle staggered closer, nostrils flaring. "You think we're scared of you? You think you can stand there with your calm little voice and act like you're better than us?" Darius looked at him then, really looked. And what Kyle saw wasn't arrogance, it wasn't fear, it wasn't defiance, it was comprehension. A clear, unshakable awareness that Darius Hale knew exactly how this confrontation would end, and none of the officers were ready for it. "You're not scared now," Darius said quietly, "because you don't understand what you've stepped into." He motioned around the lot, at the dark sky, at the wind, at the tremor in Miguel's breath. "But in a few minutes, when the consequences start landing, you will be." The street lamp flickered again, casting a pulse of shadow across the scene. Eddie kept recording. The police kept digging their own graves. And for the first time since they stepped outside, it became painfully obvious, even to the officers, that they hadn't cornered two black men in a parking lot. They had cornered two men who understood the law better than them, two men who understood the battlefield better than them, two men who understood control better than they ever would. The line of the law wasn't just crossed, it was shattered. And the officers were still too drunk to notice that every step they took made the fall even worse. Boyd's patience snapped first. It always does with men who mistake a badge for power. He yanked the handcuffs from his belt with a clatter that sliced through the cold air, metal glinting beneath the stuttering street lamp. The sound echoed across the empty lot, sharp and final, like a judge slamming a gavel. He stepped toward Marcus with the swagger of someone convinced the outcome was already written. "Hands behind your back," Boyd growled. "Now!" Kyle whooped drunkenly, delighted by the spectacle. Miguel stood frozen, dread soaking into his bones. As the night veered toward something he didn't want any part of. The wind paused, the lamp flickered. Even Eddie, recording from the doorway, felt his throat tighten. It was one of those rare moments when the world seems to lean in, waiting. Marcus straightened slowly, the kind of slow that makes your heartbeat stumble. He took in the handcuffs, the officers, the lot, the night, and then he simply said it. No, not loud, not dramatic, just a single word, spoken with a stillness so absolute it felt like the air itself stopped moving. The kind of word that doesn't need volume because its authority sits so deep it can't be challenged. Boyd blinked, thrown off balance for a fraction of a second. "What did you say?" Marcus didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. His eyes held the answer with the weight of someone who had stood in deserts halfway across the world, where silence meant strategy and certainty meant survival. But Boyd pushed on, adrenaline and liquor clouding every instinct he should have trusted. He raised the handcuffs again, stepping forward like a man walking into the jaws of something he couldn't see. And the night froze. Everything slowed. The cold air thickened. The hum of the street lamp stretched into a long, trembling buzz. The wind carried dust in lazy spirals. Boyd's boots crunched gravel in slow motion. Kyle's drunken smirk stretched unnaturally as he leaned forward to watch. Miguel's breath hitched in his chest. Eddie's camera shook with anticipation. Marcus saw none of that. He was somewhere else. Kandahar, 2015. The sun was a burning white disk over the desert horizon. The ground vibrated from distant detonations. Marcus crouched with his squad behind a crumbled compound wall, dust coating his tongue, blood drying on his sleeves. The radio crackled with warnings. 3 enemy fighters advanced on their position, fast and coordinated. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and minutes from being overrun. His men looked to him, waiting for the call, the decision, the risk. 3 seconds. That's all he'd had. 3 seconds to determine life or death. He remembered the pounding of his heart, the heat clawing at his lungs, the adrenaline sharpening every detail into painful clarity. And then the shift, the moment the fear dissolved and instinct took command. He made the call. He moved first. He saved them. And the roar of Kandahar faded. The parking lot returned. Boyd's hand twitched, closing around Marcus's wrist. Kyle leaned forward like a spectator at a prize fight. Miguel whispered something that died in his throat. Marcus lifted his head. His eyes were calm, not defiant, not angry, just certain. "If you touch me again," he said softly, "you'll regret it more than anything you've ever done." The words fell like stones into a silent pond. No echo, just impact. Boyd's jaw clenched. He shoved Marcus again, trying to reclaim dominance he no longer possessed. But the image wouldn't leave. His mind, the way Marcus had said no, the way his tone didn't waver, the way his presence didn't shrink. Something inside Boyd's instincts screamed at him to stop, to step back, to walk away. But arrogance is louder than instinct. He took another step forward. And that's when the night itself seemed to recoil, as if aware that the line had just been crossed, that whatever happened next would not be forgotten, forgiven, or undone. In that breathless, suspended second, every viewer, every witness, every person watching would feel the same thing. This wasn't resistance. This was a warning. And the officers were about to learn what it costs to ignore a warning from someone who has walked through hell and come back colder, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous. The reckoning hadn't begun yet, but its shadow had just fallen. Kyle moved first. Of course he did. Drunk men always strike before they think, and cowards always reach for weapons they don't deserve to touch. With a sloppy snarl, he yanked his baton from his belt. The metal rasped free with a harsh scrape that sliced through the cold night like a blade dragged across bone. For a split second, the parking lot held its breath. Then everything exploded into motion. Kyle lunged, wild, reckless, swinging the baton in a wide arc meant to intimidate, not control, the kind of swing that gets people hurt because it isn't trained, disciplined, or anchored in reality. But reality crashed into him anyway. Darius didn't step back. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He simply shifted. 2 centimeters, no more, tilting his head just enough for the baton to cut through empty air. The weapon missed his face by a breath. 1 heartbeat. 1 flicker of street lamp light. Then the momentum nearly sent Kyle stumbling forward into his own downfall. And even as he dodged, Darius raised his phone. His hand moved with quiet, frightening elegance, angling the camera so it captured everything. The drunken rage in Kyle's eyes, the illegal weapon drawn, the missed strike, the aggression. His voice was low, steady, professional. "Unprovoked assault by an armed officer," he narrated, tone smooth as ice. "Attempted strike with a baton." Marcus moved next, not to attack, no, that wasn't his goal. He repositioned. A precise retreat of exactly 2 steps, creating a tactical triangle between himself, Darius, and the officers. It was the kind of maneuver that special operations teams drill until it becomes muscle memory. Angle of advantage, lines of sight, distance control. His stance shifted, weight balanced, feet grounded, calm, deliberate readiness. And Boyd saw it. For the first time that night, fear slid across Travis Boyd's face. Not enough to stop him, but enough to rattle him. He realized, too late, that these men weren't rattled by weapons. They weren't shaken by threats. They weren't shrinking under pressure. They were positioning, preparing, executing. Kyle tried, again, fueled by humiliation and adrenaline. He lunged with a sloppy follow-up swing. Darius didn't bother to dodge fully this time. He simply pivoted his shoulder, letting the baton glance off empty space while he continued filming. "Second attempt," he said calmly. "Officer remains the aggressor." Kyle's face flushed with rage. "Stop recording!" he shouted, spittle flying. He reached for Darius again, but the commander shifted just enough for him to grasp nothing but wind. No ordinary civilian could have moved that smoothly. No untrained man could have calculated that quickly. No frightened victim could have remained that composed. This wasn't self-defense yet, but it was absolute control. And then Eddie Marshall stepped out of the bar. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing across the lot like a warning shot. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't filming from a crack in the doorway. He walked into the open, phone held high, jaw clenched with a courage he hadn't known he possessed. The screen glowed bright, capturing the chaos with the determination of a man who'd finally had enough. "I'm recording everything," Eddie said, voice louder than it had been all night. "County Sheriff already has the first videos," Boyd whipped toward him. "Put that down. This is police business." But Eddie had seen too much in this town, too many nights where people like Boyd got away with everything because no one had proof. Tonight, proof was everywhere. In Darius's phone, in Eddie's phone, in the bar cameras, in the shaky breaths of every civilian watching from behind cracked blinds. Darius didn't break his stance. He didn't look away from the officers. "That makes 2 cameras now," he said, tapping his phone lightly. "3, counting the one behind you on the bar wall." Boyd spun, startled, scanning for the camera he had forgotten existed. Kyle froze mid-motion, confusion replacing his rage. Miguel rubbed his forehead, recognizing the disaster forming around them. It wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. Marcus stepped closer, not to fight, but to let his presence fill the space. "You're digging your own graves," he said quietly, words steady and razor-sharp. "Every second you keep this going, every swing, every threat, every step, you're burying yourselves deeper." The street lamp flickered again. A gust of wind cut through the parking lot, cold enough to make Kyle shiver. For the first time, he looked less like a predator and more like a scared kid realizing he had picked a fight with the wrong people. And the audience, the viewers, anyone watching this unfold, would feel it too. The shift, the tilt, the moment predators become prey. Because the Hale brothers weren't defending themselves yet. They didn't have to. They were simply letting the officers destroy their own credibility, their own authority, their own lives, one frantic mistake at a time. The fall had begun, and the ground was rushing up fast, and the brothers hadn't even touched them. The sound of tires crunching over gravel cut through the chaos like a clean blade. It wasn't loud, but it was precise, too controlled to belong to anyone stumbling drunk or bluffing authority. The officers turned instinctively, their bravado thinning as headlights washed across the parking lot in a slow, deliberate sweep. The engine stopped. The door opened, and ADA Naomi Carter stepped out. She didn't rush. She didn't posture. She simply closed her car door with a calm finality and walked toward them, heels tapping against asphalt with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she owned the next chapter of this night. Her suit was sharp, her posture stronger. Every step radiated authority sharpened by years of dismantling lies for a living. If justice had a physical form, it would have walked exactly like that. Boyd's shoulders stiffened as Naomi approached, badge already in hand, her expression unreadable except for the cold efficiency in her eyes. She didn't look at the officers first. She looked at Marcus and Darius, scanning them quickly, assessing injuries, composure, threat level. Her gaze lingered a second longer on the phone's recording. Then she turned to the officers. "What?" she asked, voice smooth and razor-edged. "Exactly do you think you're doing?" Boyd tried to speak, but Naomi raised a finger, not angrily, but with the same authority a judge uses when silencing a courtroom. The gesture made him close his mouth on instinct. "Let me save you the trouble," she said, stepping directly into the light, her badge gleaming. "I have video from 3 separate angles." She nodded toward Eddie, then toward the Hale brothers' phones. "I've been here for the last 6 minutes. I watched the entire escalation." Kyle swallowed hard. Miguel looked like he wanted to melt into the asphalt. Naomi didn't slow. She pointed at Boyd. Harassment, intimidation, physical assault, attempted assault with a deadly weapon. Because, yes, Officer Riggins, a baton qualifies under the statute when used offensively. Kyle's face drained of color. She pivoted, eyes narrowing. Illegal detainment, excessive force, abuse of authority, coercion, racial targeting, civil rights violations, criminal misconduct. Shall I continue? Her tone never rose, but each accusation landed with the weight of a gavel slamming in rapid fire. Boyd took a step back. Naomi followed it with her voice. "You drew weapons while off duty," she continued. "You made physical contact without probable cause. You attempted to initiate arrest without reading any rights, without cause, without justification." She raised one eyebrow, a small lethal gesture. "And you did it on camera." She took one of the phones, Eddie's, and tapped to rewind. The screen illuminated their faces in a damning glow. The footage played, the shove, the slur, the baton, the slam of Marcus's head against the hood. Naomi watched, without emotion, like a surgeon studying an X-ray she already knew the results of. Then she checked the Hale brothers' recordings, seamlessly switching between angles, confirming timestamps. She was building a case in real time, each click of her finger another nail in the officer's coffin. When she'd seen enough, she lowered the phone. "This," she said, enunciating every word with surgical clarity, "is no longer a confrontation. This is a criminal incident. And you 3, she added, pointing at Boyd, Kyle, and Miguel one by one, are the suspects." Kyle stuttered. They started—" Naomi shut him down instantly. "The videos show otherwise. All of them." Behind her, the bar door opened wider. 2 patrons stepped out, filming. The officer's world shrank. Naomi continued, tone like polished steel. "Every action you took tonight was voluntary, documented, in violation of multiple state and federal laws." She stared directly at Boyd. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a prosecution." Boyd opened his mouth again, but Naomi's voice cut through the night like a gavel dropped from heaven. "You are done." Silence. Thick. Final. For the viewers, for anyone watching or listening to this story unfold, this was the moment, the delicious, cathartic moment, when power shifted decisively, when corrupt authority was dragged into the light and held accountable. It was justice, unfiltered and undeniable. And Naomi Carter stood at the center of it, a force of law and consequence, turning a dark Ravensridge night into the beginning of a reckoning. Naomi turned toward the brothers, and the shift in her tone was unmistakable. Respect, recognition, authority speaking to authority. the kind of respect that only comes from knowing exactly who stands in front of you. The officers felt it too, the sudden change in the air, as if the night itself straightened its spine. She stepped closer to Marcus and Darius, her voice carrying across the lot with a clarity that cut through every excuse the officers had been clinging to. "Captain Marcus Hale," she said, each syllable deliberate, "United States Army Ranger, active instructor, commendations for valor." Boyd staggered back as if she'd struck him. Kyle's grip on the baton loosened until it almost fell from his hand. Miguel whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Naomi turned to Darius. "And Commander Darius Hale, Navy SEAL Team 6. 3 combat deployments, classified operations, Distinguished Service Medal." The silence that followed wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. Every ounce of bravado the officers had clung to evaporated at once. Their eyes widened, bodies shrinking without them even realizing it. Reality didn't just hit them, it crushed them. Kyle's voice cracked first. "Wait, what?" Darius didn't answer. He didn't need to. His posture, his calm, his every breath screamed a truth the officers had been too blind to see. They hadn't cornered 2 civilians tonight. They had cornered 2 of the most elite, lethal, disciplined warriors the United States had ever trained. Boyd's throat bobbed. Why didn't you say anything?" Marcus finally spoke, voice low but resonant. "We're not required to identify ourselves to civilians, certainly not to drunk officers abusing authority." The words landed like a verdict. Kyle's arrogance dissolved into panic. He dropped the baton. His hands shook. We didn't know. If we'd known you were military," Marcus's eyes narrowed, "so it would have been acceptable if we were just ordinary civilians?" Kyle's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Miguel closed his eyes in shame. Boyd just stared at the ground, the weight of 8 years of misconduct tightening around his neck. Naomi lifted her chin, finishing the demolition. "You didn't need to know who they were. You just needed to act like officers. And you failed." Then it happened. Phones buzzed simultaneously. Eddie's, the Hale brothers, Naomi's tablet, even the officers' devices, alerts, notifications, rapid, relentless. Naomi unlocked her screen and her brows lifted. "The videos," she announced. "They're online." 3 minutes. Thousands of views. Then tens of thousands. Then hundreds. Kyle grabbed his phone with trembling fingers. His face went pale as a flood of comments filled his screen. Screenshots, reposts, hashtags firing like artillery. Ravensridge corruption, protect the Hales, justice for all, stop abuse. Boyd choked on his breath. No. This can't be happening. But it was. In real time. The shove, the slurs, the baton strike. Marcus's head hitting the hood, Darius's calm analysis, Eddie's footage, Naomi stepping in with the authority of a hammer falling on rotten stone. Everything was there. Every angle, every second. And the internet was devouring it. Naomi's voice cut through their panic. This isn't a local complaint anymore. This is national, and it's not going away. Miguel sank against the patrol car. Kyle covered his face. Boyd shook his head as if trying to wake from a nightmare, but this was the most awake he had ever been. Marcus turned to Darius. A wordless exchange passed between them, a calm, unshakable understanding built over decades of operating side by side. They hadn't humiliated the officers. They hadn't fought them. They hadn't even raised a hand. They simply let the truth speak for itself, and the truth was devastating. For viewers, this moment wasn't just satisfying, it was electrifying. The exact kind of justice reveal people replay over and over, the kind that makes comment sections explode with applause. And speaking of comments, Marcus glanced at Naomi's screen, then at the officers, then, subtly, at the invisible audience beyond the camera lens. "If you believe justice deserves to be seen," he said quietly, "leave your thoughts. Speak up. Let the world know how this should end." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even a call to action. It was an invitation, and millions were already answering it. 6 months later, Ravensridge didn't look the same. The streets were quieter at night, the bar lights softer. The tension that once pulsed beneath the surface replaced by something steadier, cleaner. Justice has a way of reshaping a place. Slowly, then all at once. And the men who once controlled this town with arrogance and fear were nowhere near the center of it anymore. Travis Boyd stood behind the counter of a roadside diner on Highway 14, wearing an apron instead of a badge. He wiped down tables with the mechanical detachment of someone who had once believed the world owed him power. Now the world barely looked at him. Customers called him sir out of politeness, not respect. His manager barked orders. He swallowed them whole. He didn't mention his past. No one asked. Every now and then, a traveler would recognize him from the viral video. The shift in their eyes always came the moment they realized who he was. They didn't yell. They didn't spit on the floor. They simply looked through him as if he were already fading. For Boyd, that was worse than punishment. Kyle fared no better. A headset clung to his ear as he sat in a cramped cubicle at an insurance office in Pine County, reading scripts in a trembling voice. "Thank you for calling Sentinel Assurance. My name is—" A pause, then reluctantly, "Kyle." He hated saying it. Most customers hung up before he finished the pitch. Some recognized him. The silence on the other end always lasted long enough to make his skin crawl. Miguel, the one who had hesitated that night, now worked as a night security guard in a supermarket on the edge of town. He didn't abuse authority anymore. He didn't have any to abuse. Instead, he walked quiet aisles with a flashlight, nodding to employees stocking shelves. He still carried guilt, heavy, visible, but for him, the fall had become a lesson instead of a sentence. While their world crumbled, the Hales rose higher than ever. Marcus Hale, once captain, now major, had become a national voice inside the armed forces. His new role wasn't just tactical, it was moral. He traveled across state lines teaching ethics, leadership, the responsibility of power. Rooms filled for his lectures, cadets leaned forward, commanders took notes. He spoke not with anger, but with conviction, shaping the next generation of officers to be better than the ones Ravensridge had known. He didn't need to mention that night. Everyone knew. Darius Hale's rise was quieter but deeper. The Pentagon tapped him as a strategic consultant for military-civilian relations, a position that placed him at tables where policy was shaped, where decisions echoed across nations. His reputation, once classified behind walls of secrecy, now appeared on magazine covers, interviews, panels, leadership circles. People didn't admire him because of what happened in Ravensridge. They admired him for everything he had already been. Eddie Marshall? His life changed, too. The rusty anchor became a symbol, then a franchise. 3 locations now carried his name, each with a plaque on the wall reminding patrons, "Silent witnesses are accomplices." Eddie trained his staff not just to serve drinks, but to serve accountability. Cameras always working, policies always clear. People felt safe in his bars in a way that echoed across the town. And Naomi Carter, she became the first black district attorney in the county's history, elected with a landslide 76% of the vote. She didn't campaign with slick speeches. She didn't promise to clean up the town. She showed people exactly what justice looked like, and they asked her to continue. Ravensridge changed under her leadership, slowly at first, then unmistakably. Complaints were investigated, cases reopened, officers retrained, bad ones removed, good ones elevated. The justice system, dusty and stagnant for years, breathed again. People talked to each other more, trusted each other more. The fear that once hung over the town like humidity lifted. The night felt lighter. The days felt honest. And the Hale brothers, they didn't ask for credit. They didn't linger in the spotlight. They returned home, focused on the missions ahead, missions bigger than one town, one incident, one video. But their presence lingered like a promise, a reminder of what dignity looks like when it refuses to bend. Justice didn't just win, it transformed, it rebuilt, it replaced arrogance with accountability, fear with clarity, corruption with consequence. And as the sun set over Ravensridge 6 months after that night in the parking lot, one truth felt anchored into the very soil. Sometimes justice arrives like a hammer. Sometimes it arrives like a spotlight. And sometimes, when the right people stand their ground, it arrives like a new beginning. In the end, Ravensridge stood as a reminder of a truth older than any badge, older than any uniform, older than the darkness that tried to swallow two men in a parking lot. A truth carved into every moment Marcus and Darius Hale refused to bow, refused to break, refused to let arrogance write the final line of their story. Because real strength was never about fists or weapons or who could shout the loudest. Real strength lived in restraint, in dignity, in the quiet courage to stand your ground without needing to strike. The brothers never threw a punch that night. They didn't have to. Their character did the fighting for them. And the world saw it. Every fall from grace that followed, the demotions, the firings, the shattered reputations, wasn't the result of revenge. It was the natural collapse of men who built their power on fear instead of integrity. Arrogance always falls. Justice never misses. The Hale brothers walked away unchanged, but everyone around them changed because of them. The officers learned too late that you cannot measure a man by the color of his skin or the calm in his voice. You cannot assume weakness simply because someone chooses peace over violence, and you cannot predict the consequences of cruelty when dignity is the one standing in front of you. Light reveals what darkness hopes to hide. And on that night in Ravensridge, the light came from every direction. Cameras, witnesses, truth itself, exposing what needed to be seen and elevating those who deserved to rise. So if this story moved you, if it made you think twice about power, prejudice, or the quiet strength of men who know exactly who they are, then let your voice be part of the change. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me which moment sent a chill down your spine. Because stories like this don't end when the screen fades to black. They continue in the choices we make, the people we defend, and the justice we demand.